How does an empire buy survival? In the mid-19th century, global superpowers faced a crisis. Massive colonial armies demanded an endless supply of explosive gunpowder. Expanding domestic populations desperately needed unprecedented amounts of agricultural fertilizer. The terrifying answer lay entirely on barren, sun-scorched Pacific islands. The destiny of the civilized world suddenly depended completely on harvesting bird excrement. Mountains of ancient guano contained incredibly high, potent nitrate concentrations. This foul substance was the essential chemical spark for warfare. The ultimate geopolitical supremacy of modern military superpowers was successfully financed by mining centuries of feces. Let us investigate this incredibly bizarre and completely absurd resource war. The Chincha Islands were absolutely toxic. Off the coast of Peru sat jagged, waterless rocks. They were buried under hundreds of feet of bird droppings. The dry climate preserved the incredibly rich, explosive chemical nitrates. This foul, ammonia-choked wasteland became the most valuable real estate on the planet. The global agricultural revolution and imperial military expansion were entirely dependent on this microscopic biological exhaust. Europe was starving for massive yields. Depleted domestic soils could not feed the exploding industrial populations. Simultaneously, vast colonial armies consumed staggering amounts of black powder. Guano was the miraculous, dual-purpose chemical solution to both crises. Governments realized that whoever controlled the fertilizer supply fundamentally controlled the survival of their nations. The sovereign wealth of massive empires was aggressively leveraged to secure an uninterrupted pipeline of excrement. Extracting white gold was incredibly brutal. The physical logistics of mining guano were a complete nightmare. The islands completely lacked fresh water, vegetation, or basic shelter. The dense, compacted feces had to be physically pickaxed apart. Acrid, blinding dust choked the lungs of anyone forced to work in the scorching sun. The staggering geopolitical value of this commodity completely erased any basic consideration for human biological survival. The labor force was ruthlessly exploited. Local populations absolutely refused to endure the lethal working conditions. Desperate contractors turned to the highly deceptive, violent coolie trade, and thousands of impoverished Chinese men were kidnapped or fraudulently contracted. These indentured servants were packed into dark, disease-ridden cargo ships bound for the Peruvian coast. To maintain the highly lucrative chemical export, the global market silently sanctioned a massive shadow slavery system. Survival on the rocks was impossible. Workers were mercilessly whipped to extract massive daily output quotas. The caustic ammonia literally burned through their skin and eyes. Many desperate laborers simply threw themselves off the steep cliffs. The life expectancy of an indentured miner on the islands was measured in mere agonizing months. The invisible machinery of international resource extraction was directly lubricated by the disposable blood of migrants. Peru bathed in an absurd fortune. The Peruvian government established a strict, highly lucrative national monopoly. They rapidly borrowed massive sums against their future guano revenues. The entire national economy became dangerously dependent on one export. This incredible financial windfall completely destroyed local domestic industries through rampant, uncontrolled political corruption. A terrifyingly fragile macroeconomic bubble was aggressively inflated entirely upon a finite layer of bird droppings. Foreign empires grew incredibly deeply anxious. Britain and the United States resented the strict Peruvian monopoly. Their domestic agriculture faced catastrophic collapse without the vital nitrates. In response, America passed the highly aggressive Guano Islands Act. This bizarre legislation legally authorized ordinary citizens to claim any unclaimed or fascist-covered rock for the military. Global logistics were so highly strained that sovereign nations officially endorsed blatant piracy to secure fertilizer. the guano supply slowly ran dry. Decades of relentless, aggressive mining eventually scraped the islands bare. The panicked global markets desperately sought a new chemical source. They found vast sodium nitrate deposits in the Atacama Desert. The brutal logistical machinery of extraction seamlessly transitioned from the islands to the barren, unforgiving mainland. The insatiable international demand for explosive commodities completely guaranteed that the economic conflict would become physical. The desert became a lethal keg. Chile, Peru, and Bolivia heavily contested the barren, unmapped borders. British capital deeply funded the massive, aggressive Chilean mining conglomerates. Tensions rapidly escalated as governments desperately tried to tax extraction. The terrifying human cost of the Guano Islands was merely the quiet prologue to total war. When national survival is strictly tied to a finite resource, diplomacy inevitably collapses into total bloodshed. The Pacific powder keg finally exploded. In 1879, Bolivia imposed a sudden 10-cent tax. They desperately targeted the highly lucrative Chilean nitrate mining companies. Chile violently refused to pay the seemingly insignificant new levy. This microscopic economic dispute instantly triggered one of the bloodiest conflicts in South America. A massive, devastating regional war was entirely catalyzed by a minor accounting discrepancy over fertilizer. The War of the Pacific erupted when the Chilean military aggressively invaded the disputed, nitrate-rich Atacama Desert. They ruthlessly crushed the combined, poorly equipped Peruvian and Bolivian armies. British investors secretly financed the overwhelmingly superior Chilean naval forces. Thousands of young conscripts died agonizing deaths in the completely barren, waterless desert wastes. The strategic geopolitical map was violently redrawn specifically to protect foreign corporate dividend yields. Peru faced absolute catastrophic macroeconomic collapse. The victorious Chilean army occupied Lima and seized the mines. The once wealthy Peruvian state was left entirely bankrupt and shattered. Bolivia permanently lost its vital, sovereign access to the ocean. The lucrative chemical monopoly that promised eternal prosperity delivered only generational poverty and humiliation. The terrifying butterfly effect of global agricultural demand ultimately eradicated entire national sovereignties overnight. Nitrates dictate the empire's borders. Chile completely monopolized the global supply of natural sodium nitrate. They effectively held the entire industrialized world hostage for decades. European powers watched in sheer terror as their gunpowder supply choked. The survival of massive global empires depended on the bloody outcome of a desert skirmish. When a crucial military commodity is highly centralized, the physical geography dictates global political survival. The resource curse was completely absolute. Nations went bankrupt fighting over the rights to export dust. The blood spilled in the Atacama fueled European artillery shells. The brutal economic mechanics of this war changed history forever. Civilians paid the ultimate price to fertilize the fields and feed the guns of strangers. The frantic pursuit of guano proves that empires will willingly sacrifice millions for basic chemistry. The legacy of the Guano Wars. The violent monopoly over Pacific bird excrement was eventually broken. German chemists brilliantly invented the revolutionary Haber-Bosch process for ammonia. This stunning scientific breakthrough allowed humanity to synthesize airborne nitrogen. Nations could suddenly manufacture limitless fertilizer and explosive gunpowder internally. The desperate, bloody reliance on desolate islands and indentured labor was instantly rendered entirely obsolete. Modern synthetic chemistry permanently decoupled the terrifying survival of empires from localized, finite biological commodities. Yet the human scars remain deep. The political borders of South America were permanently redrawn geographically. Bolivia remains a completely landlocked nation, mourning its lost coastline. The descendants of the exploited Chinese laborers still face marginalization. The devastating macroeconomic shockwaves of the resource curse echo loudly. Generations of indigenous and migrant communities were ruthlessly consumed to fuel distant European industrial revolutions. The brutal extraction of guano established the tragic, modern blueprint for catastrophic global resource exploitation. We still fight over the rocks. Today, global superpowers aggressively compete for rare earth mineral deposits. The insatiable logistical demand for advanced technology perfectly mirrors history. Modern supply chains still quietly rely on highly vulnerable labor. The international scramble for microscopic components drives aggressive geopolitical brinkmanship. The terrible human cost of maintaining global dominance is simply outsourced to invisible, distant frontiers. History proves that whenever a vital strategic resource is geographically isolated, bloodshed becomes a mathematical certainty.